Hi, I'm Kayla. Are you out of your mind? My own mother hissed, because I gave up my first-class seat for a burned, disabled veteran. She didn't ask his name. She didn't care that he couldn't walk. She just said, "He's not your problem." But he was, because a week later, black SUVs with military plates surrounded my dying farm, and suddenly the same family who mocked me, they went dead silent. I thought giving up that seat would cost me everything. I had no idea it would reveal everything they'd buried for years. Before we dive in, have you ever done something right and been punished for it? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone. The airport smelled like floor polish and burnt coffee. I could hear my son humming beside me, tugging his little carry-on with the kind of excitement only a 7-year-old could muster before a flight. My husband Derek was ahead of us, already flashing his ID to the gate agent. We were flying to Virginia for Uncle Henry's memorial, a man none of us really knew but were obligated to mourn. "First class, huh?" Derek smiled, nudging me as we passed the line of tired travelers in coach, finally using those points for something decent. I nodded, but my eyes weren't on him. Just beyond the gate, an older man stood stiffly, leaning on a metal cane. His face was a map of burns, raw and healed over again, one eye cloudy with scar tissue. His left sleeve was pinned to his shoulder, nothing beneath it. A prosthetic arm hung from the other side, too shiny, too new. He clutched a boarding pass and looked lost. One of the airline staff was explaining something to him, politely but firmly. I didn't catch every word, but I caught enough. "Overbooked. I'm so sorry. We had to move you to the back." He looked like he didn't want to make a fuss, like he'd heard worse. My son whispered beside me, "Mom, is he a soldier?" I swallowed. "Yes, baby. He was." "Is that what a hero looks like?" I hesitated. I'd told him once, in one of those bedtime talks where he asked about courage, that real heroes don't wear capes. But I hadn't expected to be standing next to one at Gate B4. Without saying a word, I turned, walked back to the agent, and handed over my boarding pass. "Can you give him my seat?" I asked. "It's first class. He should have it." The agent blinked. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "I'm sure." I didn't look back. I didn't wait for applause. I just took the crinkled new boarding pass she handed me and moved back down the jet bridge toward coach. My mother's voice cut through the hum of boarding announcements like a knife. "Did she just give away her seat?" She was seated just across from the gate, legs crossed, manicured fingers wrapped around a double espresso. "She gave up a seat we paid for that?" she hissed. My brother Lucas burst into a short laugh. Classic Kayla, always making a scene. "She's doing it for attention," my sister murmured, loud enough for half the boarding area to hear. "Watch her post about it later." "Good person." I kept my head down. Derek glanced at me but didn't say a thing, not in front of them. The veteran shuffled slowly toward the gate. As he passed me, he paused, just for a second. His one good eye met mine. There was something fragile in his expression. Confusion, maybe. Pride buried under years of hurt. He gave me the smallest nod before the staff gently led him forward. My son reached for my hand and squeezed. "That was good, right?" I smiled at him, faint and quiet. "Yeah, buddy, it was right." We found our seats way in the back. The overhead bin was full, of course. Derek muttered under his breath and shoved our bags under the seat with a frustrated sigh. My mother walked by us like we were strangers. Lucas passed with a smirk. My sister didn't even glance in my direction. I pressed my head back against the thin seat cushion. The whir of the engine covered the sound of my thoughts. For a while, I stared at the laminated safety card in front of me, pretending to read. I remembered a time, maybe I was 12, when I'd refused to throw a rock at a stray cat my cousins were teasing. My father had told me later that night, "The world steps on quiet women, Kayla. If you don't shout, you'll get crushed." But I had learned something else, too. Sometimes when the world steps on you, you leave a mark it never forgets. The seat was cold. My knees touched the tray. My son leaned into my shoulder and dozed off. And still, I felt warmer than I had in years. Somewhere mid-flight, I caught sight of the veteran again. He had reclined his first-class seat, blanket over his lap, drink untouched on the tray, but he turned ever so slightly, looked over his shoulder and let his eyes sweep the cabin until they landed just briefly on me. That glance held no smile, no words, but something passed between us, like he had memorized my face. Then the turbulence started, not in the air, but in my pocket. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You made an impression." I frowned. My mother, sitting in the aisle just behind us, leaned in with that voice she always used when she wanted to sound sweet but meant the opposite. "Don't expect a thank you, Kayla," she said. "He's not your problem." I turned away from her and looked out the window. We were descending through thick clouds, the gray giving way to the rolling greens of Virginia's hills, and in that moment, I felt something unplaceable shift. The plane jolted, not from wind, but from the weight of a truth unspoken. I didn't know it yet, but that single gesture on Flight 728 would rewrite the course of my entire family's future. I didn't say a word on the ride home from the airport, not when Derek joked about turbulence, not when Mom gave me one of those thin-lipped glares while we waited for luggage, not even when my son leaned into me and whispered, "That man in first class." He reminded me of the soldier in my comic. I just nodded, kissed the top of his head, and drove us home through light drizzle, my knuckles tight around the wheel. I thought the gesture had ended there, with a nod, a buzz on my phone, and a patch of sky cracking open over Virginia. But it hadn't. 3 days later, I got a text from Mom. "Dinner at Lily's. 6 p.m. We need to talk about what happened. No, please. No, how are you?" Just that cold precision of obligation wrapped in family lace. I sat with the message on my screen, coffee going lukewarm in my hand. I almost replied, "I have plans." But I didn't, because I already knew. If I didn't show up, they'd twist the narrative before dessert. So I put on a soft sweater, combed my hair back, and drove to my sister's house in Lexington, one of those perfect suburban boxes with white shutters and a wreath on the door that screamed Instagram-worthy, real feeling optional. The porch light was already on, though it wasn't even dark yet. I pulled into the driveway behind Lucas's SUV and Mom's hybrid. Derek had taken our son to a school art show. He didn't ask why I wasn't going. Inside, the smell of lemon chicken hit me first, then the gleam of a too-polished kitchen. Everyone was already seated at the long farmhouse-style table, except for one chair at the far end, not tucked in like the rest. No plate, no wine glass, just a plain napkin and silverware set in a neat line like a silent directive. "Kayla," Mom said, not looking up from her wine. "Nice of you to join us." Lily turned from the stove, smile tight as wax. "We started without you. Hope that's okay." I walked in slowly, scanning the table. Lucas had a beer in hand. His girlfriend, new this year, I couldn't remember her name, nodded politely. No one offered me a drink. I sat where the napkin told me to sit. There was no small talk. Mom set down her fork with a soft clink. "Let's get to it. What you did on that plane? Here it comes." Was embarrassing. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "You gave up a seat we paid for," she said, voice low and controlled, "to a complete stranger, in front of everyone. The entire cabin was watching." Lucas leaned back. "People were whispering, Kayla. I saw it. Did you see what that woman did? Like we're some kind of villains." I stared at him. "You're upset because people thought I was kind?" He laughed through his nose. "No, we're upset because, once again, you hijacked the moment, made it all about you." Lily chimed in, placing a bowl of salad on the table with a little more force than necessary. "I was going to make an announcement. That flight? I was going to tell everyone I'm pregnant." She paused for effect, glancing around the table like waiting for applause. I blinked again. "You wanted to announce it? During a memorial trip?" Tears welled in her eyes suddenly, fast and shiny. "You always ruin things, Kayla. Ever since we were kids, you just insert yourself into moments. Remember Mom's anniversary party? You brought those foster kids like it was a charity event. Mom nodded solemnly, taking another sip. You have a pattern. This savior complex of yours. You've made us look cold, and you wonder why people pull away from you. Something in me recoiled. I hadn't said a word yet in my own defense, but I could already feel how this was being shaped, like wet clay molded by fingers that had done this 1,000 times before. It wasn't about attention, I said, voice quiet but steady. It was about doing the right thing. That man, he was a veteran. He was... Mom cut me off. We know. Burned, disabled, very moving. But Kayla, he's not your burden. Lucas scoffed. We all saw him. We all felt sorry. But you had to be the one to stand up, to show everyone you're better than us. I looked down at my untouched plate. The food smelled delicious, but my appetite was gone. I could feel my pulse behind my ears. Lily dabbed her eyes dramatically. I cried on the flight. You didn't notice. I was sitting right there. Did you ever stop to ask, I said slowly, if maybe he needed it more than I did? That it wasn't about us at all? Lucas rolled his eyes. Of course it was about us. Everything you do is a silent judgment. You never say it out loud, but it's there. Look at me, I care. You should too. It's exhausting. Mom placed her hand flat on the table. You've always been dramatic, Kayla. Always had to push back, always chasing some cause. But what about your family? I looked at them. Really looked. At Lucas, sipping his beer like he was bored. At Lily, blinking away crocodile tears. At Mom, her lips pressed so tight the lipstick had bled into the wrinkles. And I realized something I should have known long ago. No matter how much good I did, no matter how quietly I moved or how big the gesture was, it would never be enough for them. I stood slowly, folding my napkin and setting it beside my untouched plate. Thanks for dinner, I said, keeping my voice even. I won't bother you again. Lily opened her mouth. Mom stood. You're not the victim here. But I didn't look back. I walked out the front door, the scent of lemon and garlic trailing behind me like a ghost. The air had gone cool. My shoes crunched on the gravel driveway. I pulled my keys from my purse, heart beating steady now, not racing. But when I reached the car, I saw something tucked under the windshield wiper, a plain envelope. No name, no return address. I froze. It wasn't the dinner that shook me, it was what came after. The porch light across the street flickered once, then steadied as I stepped off the curb. It was just past 9, the air still clinging to the summer warmth, and the cicadas in the distance droned like they had something to say. I reached for the envelope under my windshield wiper with cautious fingers, half expecting a parking ticket or some passive-aggressive family note. But it wasn't that, not even close. It was just a photo, a slightly curled Polaroid, of Aaron. He was in uniform, smiling like the world hadn't worn him down yet. There was something in that smile that made my throat tighten. And tucked inside the envelope, nestled behind the photograph, was a military challenge coin. Polished, heavy, not one I recognized. I traced its ridged edge with my thumb, and before I could stop myself, I sat in the driver's seat and just stared. No note, no handwriting, no explanation. I hadn't seen that photo before. It was from his second deployment, maybe his last. His eyes were clear in it. Before the burn scars, before the weight of silence crushed him, the coin gleamed under the dome light, and my grip tightened until my knuckles paled. My breath caught in my throat as if someone had clamped a hand over my chest. My fingers trembled as I turned the coin over. Aaron. God. I hadn't spoken his name aloud in years. At Thanksgiving, they never set a plate for him. No one asked how I was holding up. When he died, they offered casseroles and silence. And after the funeral, it was like he'd never existed. The house got quieter, but I was the only one who noticed. I drove home in a daze, headlights blurring the road like rain might fall, though the sky was clear. I didn't even turn the radio on. I needed the silence, needed to hear my own thoughts scrape the inside of my skull. Once home, I left the lights off and went straight to the bedroom. The lockbox under my bed hadn't been touched in years. It still had that faint metal smell, mixed with dust and old grief. I pulled it out and knelt on the floor, my knees protesting as if my body already knew this was going to hurt. Inside were the letters, his medical records, a manila folder I'd labeled "in case." I hadn't opened it since the year he died. Back then, I thought maybe I could fight. Maybe I could get someone to listen. I'd sent emails, left messages for JAG attorneys and base journalists. I even walked into a courthouse once, shaking but determined. And each time, the answer was the same. There's not enough evidence, or worse. Ma'am, maybe it's best to let this rest. But the night Aaron came back from that final tour, he sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking, eyes fixed on the wall, and whispered, "They're gonna bury me, Kayla. Not with bullets, with silence." And 2 months later, he was gone. The official report called it an accident, engine failure during a training flight. But he'd told me before that flight, "If anything happens, it wasn't the plane. You remember that." I did. Every single word. But my family? They had different words. "Kayla, this isn't your war. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Dragging this up won't bring him back." So I stopped talking. I buried the file. And I pretended I didn't hear his voice every time I closed my eyes. Now, staring at that coin, I realized it wasn't just grief on that plane when I helped the older vet. It wasn't just kindness. It was Aaron, pulling something out of me I'd shoved deep down and labeled too dangerous. I whispered into the stillness of my room, "I see you, Aaron. I see it now." My fingers fumbled through the box until I found a smaller envelope tucked between the files. I didn't recognize it at first. It was addressed to my mother. Postmarked 3 weeks after Aaron's death. It was opened, barely torn at the side. Curiosity prickled. Inside was a formal letter from a military review board. They had requested a statement from the family regarding any allegations Aaron might have shared, or if any relatives had been involved in contacting the media or legal assistance. Then I saw it, a photocopy of the response, from my mother. "This family has had no involvement in any military proceedings. We support our armed forces, but were not made aware of any claims or misconduct. My daughter Kayla is grieving, but was not involved in any official matters." I read it twice, then again. Slower. They cut me out, denied me, lied. That sinking feeling? It wasn't new. It had just been waiting for this exact moment to come up for air. I sank onto the carpet, that cold letter in one hand, Aaron's coin in the other, and realized my family didn't just walk away from Aaron's pain. They helped bury it, cemented it, filed it under too messy. My father always said, "Keep the family name clean." My mother believed appearance was everything. And Aaron, scarred, broken, a whistleblower, threatened that image. So they erased him. And in the process, erased me. They didn't just abandon the man I loved. They erased his voice, and mine, with a signature and a lie. I sat there until the moonlight shifted across the floor, silent but boiling. My grief wasn't over. It had just been rerouted, locked behind civility and shame. But now? Now it had a voice again. And the next morning, as the sun crept over the blinds and painted the room in dull gold, I reached for my phone and pulled up a number I hadn't dared dial in 10 years, an old contact in a veterans justice group Aaron once trusted. I hesitated, my thumb hovering. Then I pressed call. The next morning, after barely sleeping, I stood in the kitchen, fingers curled around a chipped coffee mug, staring out into the backyard like it might give me courage. The call I was about to make wasn't long or complicated, but it felt like prying open a door that had been nailed shut for a decade. I found the number written on a yellowed notepad inside the old lockbox. The ink had bled slightly with age, but it was still legible. Veteran Justice Project. Ask for Iris. My stomach twisted as I dialed. It rang twice. "Veteran Justice," a firm voice answered. "This is Iris." I hesitated, then said, "Hi, this is Kayla DeWitt. I'm Aaron DeWitt's widow." The silence that followed was short, but it weighed heavy. "Kayla," she breathed. "We tried to reach you years ago. We sent letters, emails, but your number was disconnected. My grip on the phone tightened. I never changed my number. There was another pause, this time laced with quiet confusion. That's strange. We were told... Never mind. I'm just glad you called. She asked if I had time for a brief conversation. I nodded, even though she couldn't see. Yes, please. I remember Aaron's file clearly, she continued. It haunted a lot of us. He was one of the first to come forward with reports from Camp Folsom. We had a few others, but his documentation was detailed, organized. Then, after he passed, the case quietly disappeared. I never saw any of that, I said, voice shaking. I didn't even know an investigation was started. Because, she said gently, you were removed from the witness list. What? I just sent you something. Check your inbox. I rushed to my laptop and clicked open the email. The PDF attachment loaded slowly, as if to draw out the ache. It was a letter, dated 8 years ago, from the U.S. Army, addressed to me. A formal request to discuss Aaron's final deployment, citing inconsistencies in medical logs and a gap in mission reports. They wanted to schedule an interview. My name was listed as the primary witness. I never received it. My breath caught when I saw the addendum at the bottom of the second page. Per request received from Kayla DeWitt's legal proxy, please cease direct contact for mental health reasons. All communication shall be redirected through authorized family representation. What the hell? I whispered. Iris added quietly, the note came from a firm registered to a Joseph Lindell. Does that name mean anything to you? My blood ran cold. That's my father's lawyer. My brother used him for family estate matters. I stepped back from the screen like it might explode. They told the Army not to contact me? I'm afraid so. For your mental health, it says. Iris sounded apologetic, but her voice had that steely edge only experience can give. I've seen families do this before. It's a way to make people disappear from their own story. I clenched the edge of the kitchen counter, knuckles white. The world around me went still, like a frozen photo. The only movement was my own heartbeat, thudding louder than anything else. I remembered Aaron's funeral. My brother had pulled me aside. It's done, he said. Don't make this bigger than it already is. Let it go. Don't drag us down. Back then, I thought it was grief talking, or exhaustion. But now I saw it for what it really was. Preemptive cleanup. They didn't just want Aaron forgotten. They wanted me scrubbed out with him. You didn't protect me, I whispered to no one in particular. You protected yourselves. Iris let the silence stretch, then asked, Kayla, would you be willing to formally reopen this? There's a new push in Congress around military whistleblower protection, and Aaron's name, his file, it's still sealed, but not deleted. We can request it. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the same one Aaron and I bought from a second-hand store when we first moved in. My fingers brushed the wood's worn edge, as if his hand had just left it. Yes, I said. Let's do it. There was a beat before Iris spoke again, voice steadier now. It won't be easy. Once this comes up, the people who buried it are going to feel exposed. Some may push back. It could get messy. They've kept it tidy for long enough. We made arrangements to speak again later that week. She'd begin the paperwork, start pulling archived data, file formal requests. I would draft a statement, maybe even prepare to testify if it went that far. Just thinking about it made my throat dry, but I wasn't backing down. Not this time. I stayed at the table long after the call ended. The sky outside shifted from soft blue to a heavy amber as the sun crept downward. Evening took its time. The house was quiet, but my mind raced, not with fear, but with focus. At some point, I went to the hall closet and pulled down a plastic bin. Inside were Aaron's old notebooks, a shoebox of medical forms, his deployment logs, and one more envelope. It was unopened. I turned it over slowly. No postmark. Just my name, scrawled in my mother's handwriting. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside, a typed letter addressed to the Army Inquiry Committee, signed by my mother, denying my involvement with military advocacy, emphasizing that I'd been emotionally unstable following Aaron's death and that no further contact would be in her interest. It was dated 3 weeks after the funeral. 3 weeks. I gripped the paper so tightly the edges curled. That was the week she had invited me over for Sunday brunch. The same week she had smiled and asked me to move on, telling me Aaron wouldn't want me to dwell in anger. The same week she sat across the table and told me, "You've always been too sensitive, Kayla." I thought I'd been crazy for feeling something was off. But no, I wasn't crazy. I was erased by the people who should have defended me most. I sat in the hallway, knees to my chest, the letter on the floor beside me, and said aloud to no one, "You knew. You all knew. And you buried him to protect your comfort." The sun was gone now. Streetlights buzzed faintly outside. I got up slowly and walked to my bedroom. I changed clothes, nothing dramatic, just jeans and a gray jacket. I wasn't dressing for war, but I was done waiting. By sunset, I drove straight to the one person I swore I'd never speak to again. My brother. I didn't remember the drive into Nashville. Somewhere along the way, I'd passed the familiar fields, the gas station where Aaron once fixed a stranger's flat tire without asking for thanks, and the coffee shop where we'd talked for hours about life after the military. But my hands stayed tight on the wheel, and my eyes barely blinked. Sunset had melted into a golden haze over the skyline by the time I parked. Martin's new office was glass and steel and arrogance. The building gleamed like it had something to prove, just like he always did. The receptionist gave me a polite nod, probably assuming I was a potential investor or someone there to discuss logistics. She didn't stop me. I stepped into the elevator and punched the floor for the executive suite. My breath didn't steady until the doors opened. Martin was seated behind a minimalist desk, tapping away on his laptop like a man who believed the world would collapse without his daily input. He didn't even look up when I walked in. When he finally did, his eyes flickered with surprise, but only for a second. Well, look who survived her own silence. I didn't play his game. I stepped forward and placed the printed Army email, highlighted, time-stamped, addressed to me, right in the center of his spotless desk. "You told them I was unfit," I said quietly. "You stopped an investigation that could have cleared Aaron's name. You buried it." Martin picked up the paper like it was some random flyer off the street. He skimmed it, then leaned back in his chair with a casual shrug. "We had to think long-term. Dad's deal with Oakbridge was weeks from closing. If this had blown up back then, the stock would have flatlined." For a moment, I couldn't speak. He looked so calm, so damn rational, as if reputations and IPOs were more sacred than a man's service, a woman's grief, or the truth itself. "My husband's name didn't matter?" I asked. "My life didn't matter?" All that mattered was the family name and a few extra zeros on a portfolio. Martin's mouth curled into that same smirk he used as a teenager, back when he cheated at Monopoly, and called it strategy. "You were spiraling, Kayla," he said. "You cried at the funeral like the world had ended. You wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. You weren't thinking clearly. We did what we had to." "Don't you dare spin this as concern," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "You erased a soldier to protect a stock price." He scoffed, folding his arms. "Come on, don't turn this into some moral crusade. You gave up your seat to a vet last week, and now you're playing military martyr?" That hit harder than I expected, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I looked at him, really looked, at the man who once pulled my hair during road trips, who made me laugh until I cried at our mother's expense, who sat stone-faced at Aaron's funeral like it was just a board meeting with more flowers. "Thank you," I said, calmly. "For what?" "For confirming everything I needed." I didn't wait for a response. I turned, walked to the elevator without looking back. Behind me, his voice followed. "Careful what you stir up, Kayla," he called out. "You might not like what floats to the top." The doors closed before I could answer. That was probably for the best. I didn't trust what might have come out of me if I'd stayed. I got in the car, drove with no direction, just movement. Nashville's lights blurred past, neon and noise, but I didn't hear any of it. The road pulled me forward, out of the city, back into quiet. But inside me, chaos. My mind looped like a broken cassette tape. Aaron's voice from the last voicemail. "Don't believe everything they say. You know who I am." Then my father's cold stare at the memorial when I asked if he believed the allegations. And my mother, arms crossed at the airport, whispering, "Don't start this again, Kayla, we've moved on." No, they had moved on. They'd moved on from Aaron, from me. I didn't even realize I was crying until the sleeve of my shirt felt damp. I pulled off the highway and turned down the gravel road to my land, headlights catching the old fence line and overgrown weeds. The sky had turned a dusky blue, with a few stars beginning to show. As I neared the driveway, I saw someone crouched by the gate, struggling with a rusted hinge. It was Trey, the young man from the airport. He stood slowly when he saw me, brushing his hands off on his jeans. "Ma'am," he said, sheepish but warm. "I never got to thank you." I didn't answer, just looked at him. His face was clearer now in the twilight, and the scars across his jawline didn't take away from his strength. They framed it. His posture was firm but not stiff, like someone who had known pain but chose to keep standing anyway. He glanced at the gate again, then back to me. "I figured I owed you something, so I started fixing this. Hope that's okay." I walked toward him, knees still unsteady, heart still burning from everything Martin had said, and without a word I bent down beside him, picked up a wrench, and started tightening the opposite bolt. He didn't say anything more, and neither did I, but somehow, in that silence, something inside me started to shift. I wasn't okay. Not yet. But I wasn't done, either. That night, I didn't turn on a single light in the house. I moved through the darkness like a ghost, numb after what had unfolded with Martin. I left my boots by the door, tossed my keys on the kitchen counter, and there it was, a plain brown package resting quietly on the porch bench. No return address, no handwriting, just my name, Kayla Thorne. I brought it inside with a strange weight in my chest, like my heart knew what my head didn't yet. I sat at the kitchen table. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I opened the box, peeled back the brown paper, and froze. Aaron's field journal. I hadn't seen it since before he deployed. I ran my fingers over the frayed edges, the weathered leather cover cracked in places, corners warped by sand and sweat. Inside, his handwriting greeted me, tight, neat, disciplined, just like him. I turned the pages slowly, page after page, notes from missions, names of team members, locations scribbled in shorthand, each entry read like a man trying to hold order in chaos. But then, near the back, a name jumped out at me, Martin. It was in the margins of a mission summary. Supply drop delayed, intel confirmed via Martin T. My pulse kicked. Why would Aaron write that name? Why was my brother's name in a war journal? Then I found the final entry. The writing was rushed, uneven. If anything happens to me, Kayla deserves the truth. No period, just the raw end of a thought. I sat there for a long time, staring at the page. A storm of questions swirled in my head, none of them landing. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even lie down. I just sat with the journal on the table, as if Aaron was still talking to me through it. The knock came at 6:30 a.m. I jerked upright, disoriented. Another knock, firm, official. Outside, a black SUV idled at the edge of my dirt driveway. A man stepped out, gray-haired, rigid posture, dressed in full military uniform, a decorated colonel. He walked up the porch like he'd done it 1,000 times before. "Ms. Thorne," his voice was low, controlled. "I'm Colonel Grant, Internal Review Division, U.S. Army." I nodded, unsure what to say. He didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped inside, scanned the space, and pulled a manila folder from his coat. He laid the contents on the table, a series of photos, redacted reports, time-stamped surveillance stills. He slid one document forward. This was submitted 2 weeks before your brother's death. It bears your signature. I leaned in. It was a waiver, a block on further investigation into Aaron's mission. My name was at the bottom in black ink. I didn't sign this, I whispered. I wasn't even in Tennessee then. I was at the university in Chapel Hill. He gave a tight nod. We know. That's why we're here. The next few minutes blurred together. He explained the Army had reopened Aaron's case quietly, that a trail had been uncovered, a digital submission routed through shell networks, untraceable except for one detail. We believe your brother submitted this under a proxy account, he said calmly. He had help. Someone inside. I stared at him. My throat was dry. Why now? Because Aaron flagged his journal as a failsafe, he replied. It was recently decrypted. Your name, your brother's name. It forced our hand. He paused, then looked me directly in the eye. Ms. Thorne, if this proceeds formally, will you testify? I opened my mouth, closed it again. He stood, sensing my hesitation. You don't have to answer now, but think carefully. This isn't just about your brother. This is about justice. After he left, I walked to the window and watched the SUV disappear down the gravel road. The question stayed behind, sitting heavy in the room. Would I really testify against my own family? If I spoke up, I would be tearing open everything. The family business, my parents' reputation, Martin's career, and yet, if I stayed quiet, Aaron would remain a statistic, a fallen name on a flag-folded casket. If I speak, I destroy them, I whispered. If I don't, I destroy myself. The weight of it settled into my bones. That afternoon, I stepped out to the back field, hoping movement would quiet my mind. The sun hung low, casting long gold shadows. I spotted someone near the gate, Trey. He was tightening the chain on the fence, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow. He straightened when he saw me and smiled. Hey, he said, thought I'd finish what I started. I walked over, picked up a pair of pliers, and crouched beside him. As we worked, I noticed a long scar snaking down his back, just visible beneath his damp shirt. IED, he said, catching my glance. 3 years ago, they said I wouldn't walk again. I looked at him. But here you are. He gave a half laugh, half sigh. Yeah, well, giving up would have made them right. We worked in silence for a few minutes. No speeches, no philosophy, just wire, sweat, and quiet strength. That night, after a quick shower and a cup of tea I barely touched, I sat back at the kitchen table. The field journal was still open. I flipped back to the final page. Aaron's words stared back at me like a dare. I picked up my phone. For the first time in weeks, my hand didn't shake. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Kara Gibson, an independent military journalist. She picked up on the second ring. This is Kara. I took a breath. It's Kayla Thorne. I have something to say, but off the record, for now. By the time the first light crept through the blinds, my phone was already vibrating across the counter. At first, I thought it was another robocall until I saw the name of the news outlet flash on the screen. Then another, and another. The Army had done it. They'd posted the updated list of witnesses on their public archive site, and my name was right there, bold as a headline. I didn't have time to prepare. Within the hour, 2 white news vans rumbled down my gravel road, trailing dust and entitlement. I stayed inside, curtains drawn, heart hammering. They parked just outside my fence like they owned the place. Someone knocked, loud, impatient, and when I didn't answer, they left a card wedged into the wood slats of the gate. Inside my mailbox, I found something else. A wrinkled envelope with no return address. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. I opened it and stared at the single torn-out magazine page with a word scrawled across in marker, liar. That's all it said. My stomach twisted. I turned off my phone, only to turn it back on again 10 minutes later. The missed calls stacked like bricks, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Distant cousins, old neighbors, a woman I barely remembered from high school. Some were reporters, some weren't. All wanted a quote, an explanation, or a reaction. I gave them none. That afternoon, I finally gave in and turned on the TV. I needed to know how far this had gone. What I saw made me drop the remote. Martin. There he was. My brother, on national television, sitting under studio lights in a clean navy blazer, speaking calmly, with that rehearsed grief in his voice I'd seen too many times at family funerals. "She was always fragile," he said, "even as a kid. I think losing Erin unhinged her. Now she's dragging the family through this because she can't let go." I didn't realize I was shaking until I noticed the coffee cup trembling in my hand. The anchor nodded sympathetically. "There's a clip circulating from the funeral. She appeared to have a breakdown, crying loudly, struggling to breathe." They played it. They played the worst moment of my life. I saw myself on screen, buckling beside Erin's casket, tears streaming, chest heaving in panic. A younger version of me, drowning in grief, and now being dissected like an exhibit. Martin's voice returned. "It's sad, but attention-seeking is nothing new for Kayla." I turned the TV off. I didn't need to hear more. I already knew what came next. The whispers. The market was always my sanctuary. A place where people waved, asked about my carrots, shared weather complaints like old friends. But that morning, as I walked the narrow aisle between stalls with a basket in hand, something had shifted. A vendor I'd known for years didn't look me in the eye. Another muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Didn't think she'd stoop this low." No one confronted me outright, but the cold shoulders, the dropped conversations, the averted eyes, they all cut deeper than words. My basket slipped from my hand at one point, lettuce spilling out like green confetti. No one offered to help. I left it there and walked back to my truck, leaving everything unpaid. By the time I got home, the air felt heavier. The wind carried a thickness like a storm about to break. And it did. Just not in the way I expected. Trey texted me a photo. His mailbox, smashed in. Spray paint across the brick base, dripping in angry red, "Traitor lover." Below it, just a short message from him. "Might be best we don't talk for a while, I'm sorry." That was the moment it all cracked. It wasn't about me anymore. My silence had started bleeding into others' lives. People I cared about were being targeted. Because I hadn't spoken. Because I let the truth rot in a journal drawer while my brother toured studios and shaped a story that buried Erin twice. I sat alone in the living room, staring at the folded flag in its glass case, crisp and still, untouched since the funeral. That flag had once meant pride. Honor. Now it stared back like a mirror I didn't want to face. "They'll keep using my silence to bury him," I whispered to the empty room. "That ends tonight." I walked into the den and opened the drawer I'd avoided for months. The challenge coin Erin gave me the last time he was home rested inside. He'd slipped it into my hand after dinner. No words, just a smile. I'd kept it close ever since. I held it now, fingers curled tightly around the edges. The metal was warm from my skin. "I don't need them to believe me," I said, voice steady for the first time in days. "I just need them to stop lying." The decision wasn't loud. There was no music swelling, no dramatic thunder. Just me, sitting at the kitchen table dialing a number I knew by heart. The journalist answered on the third ring. "Kayla?" "I'm ready," I said. "Post the footage, all of it. No edits, no blurs, let them see what Martin did." There was a pause on the line. "You know this won't go quietly, right? It's going to get worse before it gets better." "I know." Another beat. Then she said, "All right, I'll call you before it goes live." I looked out the window. The last light was leaving the sky. Tomorrow, everything would change again. But for the first time since that awful day, I wasn't afraid of the change. Let them come. I'm not hiding anymore. By the time the sun had burned off the fog, the road in front of my farm was lined with government SUVs, the kind with tinted windows, discreet antennae, and engines that hummed too smoothly. I stood at the front porch, arms folded, my coffee going cold in the mug. When the door of the lead vehicle opened, I didn't flinch. A woman in a dark suit stepped out, her badge clipped high. "Ms. Whitmore?" I'm Major Adele Grayson with the Judge Advocate General's Corps. We've received your evidence, the full digital trail. She nodded once as if to confirm what she already knew. An official inquiry into your brother's contracts has been authorized, effective immediately. I didn't smile. I didn't speak, just moved aside to let them pass. As the agent stepped into my home, I reached into the small drawer by the entrance and pulled out Aaron's challenge coin, the one he had given me during his last leave. I placed it gently on the threshold, not for ceremony, not for show, just for him. "Walk this one with them, Aaron," I whispered, "just this one more." The moment lingered, just me, the coin, and the footsteps behind me. Then I turned and closed the door. 2 days later, I found myself in the corridor of the county courthouse, seated outside room 3B. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Inside, my father was under oath, giving a deposition to the state attorney's office. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there because I had nothing more to lose and nothing more to prove. But then the shouting started, a muffled thump, then chaos. The courtroom door swung open and I saw him, my father, clutching his chest as his knees gave out. An officer rushed forward, papers scattered. For a moment, everything slowed. And then Martin. He didn't run to Dad's side. He pointed directly at me through the open doorway. "This is her fault. You see what she's doing? She's killing him." No one moved, not even me. I stood still, watching as my father was laid down, the paramedics arriving moments later. Martin's voice echoed in the hallway as they wheeled the gurney past me. "She poisoned this family. She always has." He was shaking, furious, not because Dad was hurt, but because he'd lost control. I left quietly, ignoring the whispers, the clicking phones, the reporter scribbling outside. By that night, the footage had gone viral. They'd captured the whole scene, how I'd stood silent, unmoving, calm, how Martin had screamed like a man unraveling. The comments under the video were a mix of sympathy and rage. But one stood out. A woman named Carol W. wrote, "She didn't even raise her voice. My son served too. I wish someone had done what she did for him." That hit me harder than Martin ever could, but Martin didn't stop. Hours later, his attorney filed a defamation suit, claimed I'd destroyed his reputation, that I'd slandered a decorated officer. But within 48 hours, the case collapsed. The digital trail I'd handed over proved he'd tampered with Aaron's discharge documents, rerouted his benefits to cover debts from his own company. The court sealed the records, but not before the press got hold of enough to bury his credibility. I didn't celebrate. I just walked back into town that Saturday for the first time in weeks. The farmer's market was quieter than usual, but the difference was palpable. No whispers, no turned backs, just nods, not smiles, but not scorn either. As I passed the stall where I used to buy tomatoes, a teenage girl reached out and slipped something into my hand without saying a word. A folded note. I waited until I was sitting at the edge of the square to open it. "My brother was a soldier too. Thank you for not giving up." It was written in pencil, barely legible, but it sat in my chest like a warm ember. The following Monday, I boarded a small regional jet to Washington, D.C. to testify before the Veterans Affairs Oversight Committee. It was early. The gate was mostly empty. As I handed over my boarding pass, the attendant looked up. "Ms. Whitmore, would you like an upgrade? We have an open seat in 1A. I looked past her toward the gate. I thought of Aaron, of his uniform, of his silence. "No, thank you," I said. "I'll stay where I am." She nodded, stamped my pass, and handed it back. As I stepped into the aircraft and passed the first-class cabin, I glanced at the seat. 1A was empty. But this time, I wasn't. The aircraft landed smoothly just past noon, the wheels kissing the runway with a soft thud. I didn't rush off the plane. I waited until most passengers had collected their bags and disappeared down the jet bridge. When I finally stepped out into the corridor of Reagan National, I felt like I was walking straighter, not because anything magical had happened in that cabin, but because I'd stopped carrying everyone else's weight. I took the metro across town, one hand resting on the leather handle of Aaron's satchel, the other gripping the folded notes I'd prepared for my testimony. The Capitol dome gleamed in the afternoon light. Tourists milled around, snapping pictures. They had no idea what I was about to say inside those walls. Maybe they never would. And maybe that was okay. The hearing room was colder than I expected. A row of representatives sat behind the dais, their expressions unreadable. A few veterans dotted the room, some in uniform, others in worn flannel or jackets bearing patches from wars long over. When it was my turn, I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't read from a script. "My name is Kayla Whitmore," I began. "My brother Aaron served in silence. He died in silence, and for years no one asked why." I paused, not for effect, but to keep from letting my throat catch. I didn't give him a seat out of pity. I gave it because he earned it. We just stopped seeing that. The room grew still. One man in the back, gray beard, eyes like rain, rubbed at his cheek. Another woman clutched a dog tag around her neck. No one spoke. No one interrupted. For once, silence felt like respect, not dismissal. When I stepped down, I didn't look for praise. I didn't need it. I'd said what needed saying. That weekend, I was back on the farm, standing near the greenhouse that Aaron and I had half-patched the summer before he deployed. The frame was still sturdy, the panels mostly intact. I spent 2 mornings clearing out the weeds, repainting the frame, and laying out rows again. But this time, I didn't just plant tomatoes or lettuce. I added lemon balm, lavender, echinacea, plants that soothe and restore. I put up a handwritten sign at the front gate. Free workshops for veterans and their families. No questions asked. The town didn't swarm to sign up. That wasn't the point. A week later, I installed a small bronze plaque just inside the gate. Nothing flashy, just words that meant something to me, in honor of those we forget too easily. A month passed. My phone rang on a quiet Tuesday while I was tending to the rosemary. I saw the caller ID, Mom. I let it buzz until it stopped. No voicemail. Later that evening, I found a letter in the mailbox, addressed in the neat, rounded handwriting of my niece. Inside, just a single paragraph. Aunt Kyla. You weren't wrong. They just weren't ready to hear the truth. I hope someday they will be. I see you. I love you. I stood at the edge of the porch for a long while after that, not crying, just breathing. The news about Martin came through a local reporter I used to avoid at the market. Disbarred, indicted on federal fraud. It was a quiet fall from grace, no press conference, no headlines screaming, just a silent end to a very loud man. Dad? He retired, no formal statement, no ceremony. One day he was gone from the board, the next, his office emptied. Last I heard, he was living somewhere in Arizona, alone. I didn't follow up. Aaron's coin sits now on my kitchen windowsill, next to the basil I've been trying not to kill. It catches the morning light, especially around 7, when the sun peeks through the pine trees. I don't cry when I see it anymore. Sometimes I touch it lightly and say, "You sat beside me when no one else did. Now it's my turn." And then I make coffee and get on with my day. Not everyone in town has changed their tune. I still get side eyes at the diner or when I drop off extra produce at the food bank. But the cruelty has faded. Or maybe it's lost its power over me. Just last week, as I crossed the town square, a man with an airborne patch on his jacket looked up, met my gaze, and gave a short, deliberate salute. I nodded back. I didn't do any of this for applause, and I sure didn't do it to be liked. They don't have to like me. I didn't do it for them. Last night I pulled out an old journal from the drawer in my bedroom. Not the one I kept after Aaron passed, but the one I used to write in before life got so loud. I flipped to the first empty page and wrote, "I didn't lose a seat on that flight. I found my footing." Then I closed the book and left it open on the nightstand like an invitation. Someday, maybe I'll answer if Mom calls again. Maybe I won't. But if I do, it'll be on my terms.